months ago, one of my cousins visited from the United States, where she was born and raised. She is a fantastic young woman, hardworking, kind, a good listener, and really smart. She's also a signed-up member, very active, of the Republican Party. Her parents, my aunt and uncle, are so to the left, they're falling off the spectrum. They are the perfect Greens. Position perfect on every single green policy you can think of. They're vegetarians. They're completely committed environmentalists who added up the carbon cost of their flight to Australia and have a plan to neutralise it by August. They wear Birkenstocks. They're both professors at an Ivy League university in a town so progressive it makes Fitzroy look right-wing. Greens voters would look at this couple and think, one day all humans will be like you. But not their 28-year-old daughter. She loves the grand old party. She could be their press secretary. How did this come to be? Was it rebellion against her parents? Was she persuaded by some cohort of gun-toting friends? I don't know her that well because she lives so far away, so I was looking forward very much to dinner to discuss this with her. And the answer, it turns out, is 9/11. She was 10 years old and at a primary school in upstate New York when the towers came down. And the teachers didn't know what to do. And she described how they were sort of telling the kids the unfolding of events. And she was terrified. And that evening, George W. Bush made a speech, which my cousin saw on the television. It was delivered from the Oval Office and it went for 4 minutes and 24 seconds. Among other things, he said, "The pictures of aeroplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Our country is strong. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbours who came to give blood and help in any way they could." It's tempting to hear these words with hindsight through the prism of the choices that came after. But to my cousin, W promised to keep her safe. He promised to keep the country safe, and he did. Through those 10-year-old eyes, that's what he did. And I was moved by what she told me, and I understood. About a decade earlier, Paul Keating did something a bit similar to me. It wasn't a fear that he quelled, but a moment in time where the right words at the right time, delivered with sincerity, stole my attention. He spoke to me. The speech he gave on the night of the 1993 election, the sweetest victory of all, was in a way my George W. equivalent. I was a bit older than 10, but still mightily impressionable. He said, "The people of Australia have taken us on trust and we'll return that trust. And we'll care about those people out there, particularly the unemployed. We want to get them back to work. If we can't get them back to work immediately, as sure as hell we're going to look after them. We're not going to leave them in the lurch. We're not going to leave them in the lurch. And we are going to put our hand out and we are going to pull them up behind us." And I remember hearing that and thinking, if I fail in life, if I fuck everything up, someone might be there to help me. I thought all politicians would be like him, making me feel something. It's not that cool, really, my Keating crush. He was an old white man even then. Yet every time he opened his mouth, I listened. My attention was drawn and he held it. I could listen to him talk about anything, whether I agree with him or not. It's not entirely rational, but it's as true today as it was then. Recently, I heard him talking on the radio about Melbourne. It was a couple of off-the-cuff remarks. He obviously thinks Melbourne's a pretty quaint little place, not much to it compared to Sydney. He said, the only thing we've got is our inner city suburbs, the beauty of them. He cares a lot about beauty. If we knock them all down with cheap development, we're knocking down the only thing we've got. And I was in the kitchen cheering. I'm obviously one-eyed on Keating, I know it. And now with the passage of time, it becomes obvious. It's a bit cliched. But there's a crucial difference between my crush and my cousin's. And that is, mine has never extended to the party. I always knew it was about him. The capacity to persuade, to demand your attention, particularly on something you don't think you care about, to change your mind and to entertain. It used to be the job of politicians. Not many people can do it with words. Keating could. My kids communicate better than the current crop of politicians. They're twins and they're turning 3 this week. They're like little politicians. They just want to eat cake every day for lunch. They love helicopters, and a lot of what they say is made up. But if at first they don't succeed, they try and try again, grasping for the words that might hit home. They try so much harder than our politicians to be understood. Keating will be to them what John Curtin is to me, a figure of history, an old bloke Nana always talked about. But who will they look towards? Is there anybody out there? Politically, my cousin is a family anomaly, the first Republican, but she's not insane. Throughout the last US presidential election campaign, there were hushed conversations throughout my family. Would she? Could she? I asked her about it. Did you vote for Trump? Her tale was full of anguish, but on the day, she dutifully went to the polling booth and voted for Hillary. Then she went home and pulled the doona over her head and went to sleep, as if she'd committed some act of infidelity. Trump has never said anything worthy of being recorded. Yet, of course, his every word is taken down. At his inauguration, he smirked. America will start winning again, winning like never before. And in response to the Florida school shooting, meeting with survivors last week, I never said give teachers guns like was stated on fake news. What I said was to look for the possibility of giving concealed guns to gun-adept teachers with military experience. George W. looks positively presidential in the shadow of the vulgarian. Bush's speech on 9/11 was not particularly memorable to me. It was incomparable, for example, to Ronald Reagan's masterful response on the evening of the Challenger disaster in January 1986. And if you're a little younger than me, the Challenger disaster was an American space shuttle that went into space and exploded. And it was an awful tragedy, and it was a particular tragedy because there was a school teacher on board. It was the first time the Americans had put a civilian to go in space, and her name was Christine, I think. And so every child in America was watching from their schools, and a few seconds, I think it was 75 seconds into the launch, it exploded, and they all died. Ronald Reagan was meant to give a State of the Union address that night, and of course he had to cancel it, and Peggy Noonan, his speechwriter, wrote in a big hurry what is considered one of the greatest speeches of the 20th century. Reagan said, "For the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy, but we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, 'Give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy.' They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It is hard to dazzle us, but for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who are watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them just this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Many Americans who are now in their 40s and 50s remember those words from their classrooms, just like my cousin remembers George W. Bush's, selected and delivered sincerely. Just as on that evening, George W. Bush said the things that needed to be said in that moment, calmly and seriously. Keating never provoked or inspired my inner world, not the way the great writers have. But he tends to cross my thoughts in some way or another almost every day. And he's my Australian measure of how far we've fallen in contemporary politics. The lack of compassion, the inability to tell a story, a reactive, dirty culture. Who wants that? What has become of our leaders' capacity to speak? It is a mystery. So many opportunities are missed. They have to get their act together. They have to get their words together. Look at these blokes, Keating and Reagan, George W, and now Trump. What do you see? Listen to Trump. What do you hear? It's the descent of man. Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.